Hello, everyone. This is Sergio Morero, and here at another episode of RBL1 Live. We have a special guest tonight. So, Connie Bowen, who is an investor at AgLaunch. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, excited to dive in. So for those watching that don't know about Connie's background, she hails from St. Louis, Missouri. So excited to get more representation on outside of the coast as well, and highlight investors focused on the climate scene. But she's a graduate of Swarthmore College, has a background not only as a Venture for America fellow and investor at Cultivation Capital, along with Great Barber VC, but also worked at the Yield Lab, and most recently became Director of Innovation and Investment at AgLaunch. So for those that don't know, can you share a little bit on what is AgLaunch?
For sure. And I'm sure that very few do. We're pretty different, I would say. So we're a farmer network at our very core. So AgLaunch is kind of built on this thesis. Our founder, Pete, has kind of this thesis that AgLaunch is actually mostly almost pre-VC ready. A lot of the technology that's necessary for agriculture has to be somewhat public-privately funded. So AgLaunch is actually a nonprofit with kind of adjacent for-profit groups. So we work with a couple different partner funds. We've also got kind of like a couple of farmer investment groups, and we also try to place farmers in with startups as early as possible, and we try to make sure that startups are conducting field trials because fewer than 2% of Americans work in agriculture, so most people don't have access to ag or really understand it. And what brought me to AgLaunch actually is kind of the lack of ag and AgTech investment that I noticed. I thought that seemed like a problem. And so we're really solving that gap both for the startups and for the farmers, right? We want farmers to get an upside in investing in all their time, energy, risk into AgTech startups, not all of which are necessarily a fit for venture capital. But all of which are solving a problem for farmers, and so therefore might still be worth some form of investment for them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And can you share with the audience what size of investments do you make, and what is your typical startup that you're looking for?
Yeah, so we're super early, like earlier than I've ever. My background is more in what I thought was early stage venture capital. But we basically do accelerator stage stuff. So we work with two different groups. We usually have about 75K investment accompanying our programs. We have an interesting, so we're AgLaunch, I'm in St. Louis. AgLaunch is actually based in Memphis, Tennessee, and a large concentration of our farmers, which are core to AgLaunch. I bet you don't talk about farmers too much on this, right? But a large percentage of our farmers are based in Tennessee, and in part, that's because we have kind of an interesting cost share program with the Department of Agriculture there, wherein the state actually pays for the cost of trials. So that's an in-kind investment. Essentially, you can only get that through the state through AgLaunch. And we're expanding. We also have a network in Iowa, and we're expanding into Willamette Valley in Oregon too, so we can hit up kind of a broader diversity of crops. But for us, it's really core to have, diversity is core in all elements of ag for us, whether we're talking about crops or people and operators and sizes and types of operations. So we're intentionally slowly expanding kind of that network across the nation. But yeah, we're really early stage. We work with two partner funds, Nova, which is a rural business investment company fund, which is a way to basically get farm credit dollars in venture capital. It's kind of like an SBIC for folks who are familiar with that. Equal levels of paperwork, but the LP is essentially a couple of different farm credit banks, which we think need to invest more in technology. And then we also work with actually a farmer co-op that was born out of a successful ethanol co-op in Iowa. They're called Ag Ventures Alliance, and they've actually got kind of an evergreen fund attached to them. And they also invest alongside us, and we are in the process of working on kind of a farmers fund that will be co-managed and will similarly invest early, though we hope to be able to actually, so I think of us as pre-seed right now. We hope that through this Farmers Fund, which will also be an RBIC, we will be able to actually address seed stage, but not larger than probably a 500K check in the next 5 years, I can imagine.
Excellent. And thank you for that, some of that color, and to talk to the audience. And the reason I wanted you on, Connie, was as even I did more research on how we make more impact into the climate space, didn't realize over 44% of the land in the US is agriculture land, and you can't, to thinking about the climate impact, you can't not think about farming, right? You can't think about the industry, think about if you can drive innovation and efficiencies, you can have quite a bit of impact there. If you can share a little bit more on, you mentioned it being early, and I wouldn't typically think venture capital can exist within a typical agriculture space because of the capital requirements needed in innovating in that. How do you all think about investments, and where does venture capital fit in that space?
Yeah, well, that's something I can talk about for a couple of days, but I'll keep it tight. So for us, and this is part of the thing that so attracted me to AgLaunch, and what I think is cool about it, we've got this flexibility in that we have these different types of entities kind of that we can play with. So we don't necessarily have everyone expecting better returns, which is good because they're not probably going to get them. But so basically, there's a couple different ways to look at it, I guess. I'm going to kind of take a step back too, to kind of like my background in more traditional venture capital. So like,
absolutely,
work with Yield Lab, corporate backed VC, still work a bit with the fund in Europe, and that's a more clear cut impact agri-food tech venture capital fund, right? But what you run into with that is, if someone's trying to domesticate, say, a new tree. And a good example of this is a company called Terviva, domesticating pongamia trees. You haven't heard of it, probably, in terms of pongamia trees, but they're cool because they can kind of, you might have heard of citrus greening, which is a big problem for orange orchards. This can grow in the same place, and it's a high value, like food grade oil seed, and it has lower environmental input. It's great, right? But how the heck do you even wrap your mind around the time horizon for domesticating a tree? Well, the citrus orchard owners said, we're not going to be able to grow oranges here, but we have this huge real estate investment that, we've already made, but that is sunk, but we want to see if we can use it. And so it is worth it to us actually to invest in that company. And so you end up with really weird investors sometimes, necessarily, because it's not, that's not going to be a fit for most traditional tech venture capitalists. And actually, so you said I live in St. Louis, but I actually am from like New Jersey, New York suburbs. And I worked with Grape Arbor VC briefly, which is more of a generalist, both fund and direct kind of family office group. But it's really interesting to watch, even over the past like 5 years, a lot of more traditional, particularly impact driven and particularly climate, which we can talk about why I think that the social element of ag tech impact is maybe more important. But you're seeing a lot more investment and kind of excitement around ag tech. But I'm a little worried about that because I think that there's often a misalignment around time horizons because there's just seasonality. We used to always say you can't press go on a pig and then kill when like you want to stop and restart. Like you actually need to grow the whole darn pig and then run it again next cycle. Like it's not, and that's even faster than a crop that only has one annual cycle. So you've got some time constraints that I think a lot of folks who aren't super close to ag sometimes don't understand. So there are a lot of opportunities for venture capital in ag tech, but certainly there are a lot of, I'm concerned about a misalignment of expectations because I think there are a lot of solutions for ag that are ag tech, but not necessarily venture, they're never going to be unicorns.
Got it. And so what type of instruments or things do you see or do you think need to exist? Whether is it revenue-based financing? Is it more, debt, venture debt? What any thoughts around that?
Yeah, this is, so I actually spent a little bit of time with the farmland investment fund too, like hedge real estate fund, REIT fund. I think there's some interesting hybrid options out there like that. I think it's interesting when you look at it from the context. You've also got a massive adoption problem actually in AgTech right now. I don't want to be critical of AgTech for folks who aren't investing. I think it's a great, I am 100% in on investing in the space. However, do so with, do some research. But yeah, I think that there's some really interesting opportunities for debt. I think there's also some really interesting opportunities, like some things we do actually, and who knows how this will end up working out, but we, again, try to get more farmers invested because there aren't very many farmers who are not high net worth individuals. That's just kind of, it's funny because we kind of think of farmers as not well off, but the large scale farmers who you're actually building all these ag tech products for tend to be, they've got millions of dollars worth of land, and they might be cash poor and land rich, but they're not that cash poor actually. And so I think there's an opportunity to bring more of, and there's an opportunity to bring also, there's programs in commodity agriculture called checkoffs, where, if you grow corn, you have to pay a cent on every dollar that you get to, or every bushel that you grow to the checkoff program. And those dollars actually can be used to be invested, maybe in equity investments and patient equity investments, maybe in kind of that. I think that we're actually going to have to come up with hybrid instruments, but I think that we'll figure out the instruments when we get the right players investing is kind of the way that I'm approaching this. And I think that we have a problem where much of the agriculture world is pretty disconnected from much of the investment world, frankly, or at least the tech investment world. And so
why is that? Well, why do you, besides being on a farm?
It's a culture. Agriculture is super interesting because it gets into all sorts of socio-political issues, right? But I've lived on a farm and worked on a farm, and I do understand, and I live in a city, and I would prefer to live in a city, but yeah, there's a rural urban divide, is kind of the short version of it, and there's cultural divide in there. And then there's all sorts of different policies that actually play into it as well. It is interesting to see, right now in this new administration, there's some more, the USDA is shifting quite a bit, the US Department of Agriculture, which is exciting, and maybe it will start to move money in different ways with different incentives behind it. But, we've got massive consolidation in agriculture too, which is not that that's not true in other industries, but it's definitely limiting. In agriculture, your exits are pretty much going to come from M&A. There's actually been a couple of SPAC attack lately, and we're late to the party a little bit in ag, I feel like, but we recently have had Benson Hill is public, Aero Farms, App Harvest, but there's not very many public ag tech companies. They get acquired by the big three seed companies, big three seed plus input companies, or the big four grain companies.
Great. It's an interesting dynamic in the end. And from your work with the Lab Institute, you mentioned some international work. Are you seeing models internationally that may work better at accelerating innovation in this space than the US? Or if you could talk a little bit about that and what you think needs to change.
That's a good question. Honestly, and this is kind of concerning to me, but I'm actually haven't seen much better. I actually feel like the US is up in front a little bit. So yeah, so I founded the Yield Lab Institute out, I was the second employee at the Yield Lab when we were just kind of a pilot fund. And as we pretty quickly, we started in St. Louis, we pretty quickly expanded into Ireland and Argentina and Singapore. And
well, let's pause there. How did that, why St. Louis and then Singapore and Ireland? Well, what was?
St. Louis is arguably one of, if not the best kind of places globally for agriculture and ag technology. I mean, so we've got what was Monsanto, now Bayer, and Climate Corp. We've got the largest independent plant research science center in the world, actually, in the Danforth Plant Science Center. We've got, our fun fact is that we've got the most plant scientists per capita, so that's cool. But no, and we're surrounded, and also all of the different commodity groups, pretty more or most of the commodity groups, including Christmas trees, which is fun, have kind of their headquarters here, right? So we've got this density of kind of movers in agriculture. And those are the folks who are investing in AgTech, actually, who started investing in AgTech. Actually, the Yield Lab was born out of cultivation capital, because a couple of guys who worked in ag industry and were investing in cultivation, actually, and involved in their life sciences fund, said, I wonder if we can make fund out of this, because it feels like we have this weird thing where we've got like life sciences, biotech, and we've got my dogs. Anyway, we've got this opportunity, I think, to invest in ag tech and figure out where it fits in the spectrum of like between tech and life sciences. And so, and it turns out that we definitely have that opportunity. And, even like with the Bayer, relatively recent Bayer Monsanto acquisition, like that leads to a bunch of really interesting founders who exit Monsanto with the resources to start something interesting that they couldn't have done internally. So yeah, we've actually used kind of St. Louis as an example of an ag tech ecosystem that can be translated into like earlier stage venture capital ecosystems, really, or startup ecosystems. And so like that's a lot of actually what the Yield Lab. So we like spun out the Yield Lab Institute for kind of a couple of reasons. One of which was to for me personally, I'm in investment for the impact side of things, not the I like to make money too, but I'm more motivated by the impact side. And I was observing a lot of kind of greenwashing in ag tech impact investing. And I wanted to make sure that the Yield Lab had some kind of rails so that we wouldn't, fall prey to that, because I think it's easy to do. And so, but also there was a need to kind of direct more dollars and awareness towards really growing ag tech ecosystems in different regions. And because of the nature of agriculture, it's going to be decentralized. You're not going to have a Silicon Valley for ag tech because, oranges are grown in this certain region and corn and soy is grown in this region. And like, that's just the way that our global agricultural system works. So it's very, while we need to and should focus on developing regional, especially crop, so that we're not, we can eat healthier and have more nutritional access. You're going to have a decentralized system, because you have to be able to get on farm to test your product, to sell your product, to build your product, really, to understand it. So yeah, we've used St. Louis as kind of a model for what, and that we can kind of build off, critique off of. Obviously, there's room for improvement here too, but we've used it to kind of compare it to like Rosario or Pras Cava. We've done some work in a couple of different countries in Africa, actually. We do some work with the UNFAO. This is all Yield Lab Institute, but all focused on figuring out, and it's been particularly interesting in Latin America, where we've had our partners, the Yield Lab Latam, trying to raise their fund. They entered in like, what year? Maybe 2017, 2016, one or the other. 2017, I think. And they were a little bit early. There wasn't really enough venture capital. Venture capital wasn't ready to fund their fund, and there wasn't going to be anyone to invest in the companies after they invested in them. And so we had to do some work there to kind of develop the ecosystem. And now they're getting into a really interesting position, I think.
And if you're looking at ag tech as an investor, what or even if an early stage founder, right, that has been doing a ton of research in ag tech asks you, hey, Connie, what do I need to start that you would invest in? What are some of the things that you would say?
Okay, well, there's a lot of options, but for me, I think that the number one underinvested kind of component of agriculture is the labor side. And now this is where you get into the fit problems too with venture capital. But from an impact standpoint, there is, and from an adoption bottleneck standpoint, the labor and the exploitation, frankly, of agricultural workers all along the food supply chain, which has kind of been exposed a bit by COVID, which is, terrible. But on some level, it's good that people are starting to read about meatpacking plants and, normal headlines. So I would say that the number one thing that needs to be invested in is, labor efficiency. And this is a huge pain point. It's obvious. It's always the largest item, largest cost for any farmer. We farm a commodity system today. And that means that we've got a lot of bottom line thinking. And so you're going to have an easier time driving adoption there. And I think that there are also, I have a background in engineering, so I've got a soft spot for robots. But yeah, but this is where you run into problems, right? Because, like, for example, strawberry harvesters, there's been a number of companies that have gotten some investment there. Those companies actually got investment from farmers who said, if we do not figure out a way to automate this, it doesn't make economic sense to harvest strawberries next year. And like that's happening with asparagus in the UK right now. And I managed blueberry farms in Oregon, and like you leave fruit on the bushes because it doesn't make economic sense to pay people to manually pick them. And the current like blueberry picker machine is pretty crappy. It's better than nothing, but anyways, so there's a ton of room for improvement there. But the challenge is that you kind of need to change the whole genetics of the crop and the layout, so that you can actually have the machine be able to operate. So actually the most obvious example of that is think about like apple trees that are like bushy trees versus apple trees that are planted in like lattice orchards. And obviously one is a lot easier for a machine to visually detect the apples. But not all orchards are lattice based, right? So you have that's a very long adoption timeline. And that's where better make sure that you're going to get the exit you want there, the return multiple you want.
That's a great example. If for some early stage where have you seen venture capital work the best in the AgTech space?
I think that gene editing and kind of cloud-based software to kind of optimize that is pretty interesting. And like that's what you just. Benson Hill is another St. Louis company, so I have followed them for quite some time. I think that you definitely see. I think that you're starting to see some interesting kind of visual stuff again for equipment companies, but one of the challenges is like John Deere is kind of your equipment company right now in the US, and it just gets bigger, which enforces continues us down this path of it only makes economic sense, and it's very difficult to shift away from row crop commodity agriculture, which doesn't necessarily result in the kind of food we want. The other thing I would say that's been pretty interesting, and I worked on kind of spinning out a company of Chess Ag Full Harvest Partners, which is the fund I worked for, called Pharmacopoeia Farms, that was focused more on vertical integration. And so I think that there will be some more interesting successes in CPG branded kind of direct to consumer farm brands. Now, you look at some of the indoor farming companies that are doing this, I would say really look at the economics of that and be sure that works, because I got into agriculture through playing with food computers and aeroponic systems. So I used to be a big believer in indoor ag, and I still think it has a lot of really interesting opportunities nutritionally and taste wise, and in certain climates. But I think that it's going to be pretty tough to get a return on investment actually in a lot of those systems today. But yeah.
And one of the most important questions I didn't ask you, we've dived deep into the AgTech industry and the impact is, how did Connie end up going from being an engineer and now focused on AgTech investing?
Mostly I say love of food plus I actually worked in restaurants. I debated doing kind of the culinary trajectory, but I was good at math. So I figured, I better get a degree in engineering because you can be a chef with an engineering degree, but you actually can't do that the other way around. And so, yeah, just kind of the love of food. And I always was into gardening, and my family does have a farm in Iowa. We didn't spend that much time there, but at least had that kind of connection. And yeah, through Venture for America, I truly, like, I definitely wouldn't be in St. Louis in the Midwest if not for having stumbled into Venture for America, which is an entrepreneurial fellowship program. Yeah, and I just bumped into the Yield Lab, and it was an awesome, dive into the deep end that I kind of haven't left, been treading water ever since. And yeah, it gave me a great view of the landscape at the right point in time to really be one of the early folks involved.
Excellent. And I appreciate you. I know we're one topic we haven't touched on that you had mentioned when we first spoke is diversity in the founder space and what more we can do to support women founders and investors, and other underrepresented groups. So if you want to share a little bit on what's really needed, and especially in the climate space, you can, if you want to venture out of AgTech, but would love your thoughts on how we can support more diversity in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for the question. It is important, and I know that that's something that's important to you too, which I appreciate. I think one thing that I've been having a conversation with a lot of women in AgTech about, like, board positions, and there are a number of women who should obviously be on some of these boards that are now private going public, and there are real opportunities there, but it's totally a kind of network game. And so I would say that AgTech is behind regular venture capital, which is, like, really, it's not a great starting point. So and I think part of that, when you, like, look into it, is also, and I struggle with this, right? Because I think farmers need to be more involved in AgTech, but also something like 99% of U.S. agricultural land is owned by white men. And so agricultural land is farmed by white men. And so you end up with, like, this, like, 1% of, like, Black farmers, and, like, only 8% of that is row crop farmers, which is really what all AgTech is for. And so, I don't have the answers, other than we've got to really talk about and be really intentional about it. Something we're doing at AgLaunch is working with a bunch of different HBCUs so that we can try to kind of invigorate their really tech transfer, try to make sure that there's more startups coming out that we can fund. But it's the thing too, though, is it's just about doing the work. And it's about hiring the right people and having the right people in the fund, like, actively seeking diverse founders and making sure that you're not going to make a pipeline excuse, because, like, my example is always, like, I started the Yield Lab, we had an all dude portfolio. And the first year I came in, we split 50-50. And, like, how did that happen? I took a lot of phone calls at 5 a.m. while I was walking my dog to make it happen. Like, that actually is what's necessary, I think, at this point in time.
Excellent. Thanks for the shift there. So I know we're just about time. Connie, I want to thank you very much for sharing a little bit of your story, your expertise in the AgTech space. Pleasure to have you as we really get a view into this sector. So thanks again. And for all those watching, this was RevenueBased Live, covering our AgTech sector, Connie Bowen, who is Director in Innovation at AgLaunch. So thanks again for joining us.